This is Chill Bill coming at you live from K-Troll, here to introduce another exciting episode of Skylanders Portalcasters, the podcast discussing anything and everything Skylanders. Over to you.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Chill Bill. My name is Trioxen, and I am here today with my co-host GFDitto. And today on Portalcasters, we will be discussing crossover characters and the potential new elements that could have arisen from some of their introductions. How do you feel about today's topic there, Ditto?
I actually am really excited about today's topic. It's a really nice one, and one that I've often had speculation about in the past.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good about it too. It's a really fun topic when you start getting into guest characters, and especially with the guest characters that have been featured in Skylanders. It's really cool to kind of see how different franchise heroes were adapted for the Skylanders formula, and also leaves a lot of room to kind of conceptualize where guest characters could have gone if the franchise kept going on.
Yes, indeed, absolutely.
All right, well, let's start from the very top with it's arguable whether he was a guest character or he himself was the main character, but we're going to talk about everyone's favorite purple dragon, Spyro.
Yes, I was actually just thinking about the fact that he could technically be considered a guest character, except for the fact that Skylanders started out conceptualized as a darker, grittier Spyro game, so it was always centered around him to begin with, and then just expanded into what it became.
Yeah.
So I could see why some people would see him as a guest, because in the world of Skylands, he would have been. But developmentally, anyway, he was the star of the show.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just interesting how definitely the franchise started with him as the hero from concept to the release of Spyro's Adventure. But as the franchise went on, his role sort of dwindled less and less to be, or less significant as a main character. I mean, he still had a very large role in Imaginators and in the TV show as the main character, but as, we started getting hundreds and hundreds of new characters to play as, him being the title star seemed to not be as significant anymore.
Correct. In fact, it lost its significance pretty much right away, with 31 other stars to speak of.
Yeah, that's true. Prior to knowing that the game originally started off as a Spyro's Kingdom in concept. When I first came across Spyro's Adventure and first learned about it, I definitely thought it was like, oh, great, we're getting a new Spyro game. But then, absolutely, when you get it and you have the option, if you just bought the starter set that plays Trigger Happy and Gill Grunt, I personally found myself leaning towards Trigger Happy at least. And then you start finding out about all the other characters coming out, and then you start picking favorites, and then as you play the game, you realize Spyro really doesn't have much bearing on anything happening.
That's very true. In fact, it went from being Spyro's game to Spyro has only as much impact on the game as any other character that you select, and thus making it feel more like he is a guest character in his own game than him being the star of the show.
And I actually, thinking about it, I might have to retract a previous statement about how his role dwindled less. Yeah, actually, and if you think, in some ways, his role increased more as he got an NPC speaking role in Imaginators.
True.
And then when Skylanders Academy came out, he himself was the main character. Well, one of the main characters. I guess that's the other thing, is that he never really regained a main character status. He was just part of a cast of main characters.
Correct. So, well, it solidified a little more that he was a main character as time went on, and these things were being introduced with Imaginators and Academy. At the same time, it also solidified the fact that he is not the main character, even though that's developmentally how it all started. And therefore, I think it was definitely necessary to bring him up for this topic of discussion, because it does, in a lot of ways, feel like Spyro was a guest character to the Skylanders.
Mm-hmm. And even though now that we know that the game did start off as a Spyro game, that did help with his translation and gameplay. Whereas I can't think of an example where a guest character wasn't treated as well as their original source, but at least with this game starting off as a Spyro game and then segueing into what it would become, Spyro's gameplay at least was treated fairly closely to his original games. He had a lot of his the trademark moves, and I think they tried to aim for the same personality even. So at least the game still did him justice as to his original games.
Correct. And will you say that justice seems to have been done based on their original gameplay to all of the guests? I would disagree with that on one point, but we will get to that point a bit later in the episode, because I think before we go there, we need to talk about the first two official guests in the series that came out with Skylanders Superchargers.
Yeah, and now it's interesting too that these guys didn't come out until Superchargers. We had to wait through Giants and Swap Force and Trap Team before we got another round of guest characters.
Right, and I was actually surprised when they did guest characters to begin with, because, well, at the time I didn't know the games had originally been designed to be Nintendo exclusive. I was well aware that Skylanders Superchargers was available on multiple consoles, and so having Donkey Kong and Bowser come to the series, it became very clear to me that either they were going to be allowing these two prominent Nintendo IP characters to make appearances on other platforms, or that the Wii U version was the superior version of the game because it would be the only one to include the entire roster. And that kind of surprised me, because it almost felt like a moment of, why would you alienate the rest of your fan base like that? Now, granted, the players on Xbox and PlayStation and whatnot were very much capable of still buying and obtaining the figures for collection purposes. But if they wanted to play as them, they had to get either the Wii U or the 3DS or even the Wii version of the game.
And I mean, that's a move that we've seen in other franchises, not Toys to Life franchises, but, Soul Calibur 2. Soul Calibur 2 back in the day, where different game versions had different guest characters. But there's something about when it's now a toy, an actual figure that you can purchase, also with the vehicles, it feels like it's a lot more restrictive, or I feel like it can hurt a lot of people's views, as like if they bought the character and then they take it home and they try and put it on the portal and it's not working because they don't have the right console. I feel like that kind of taints some of the appeal of it.
I can only imagine what kind of a letdown it would be to get your child Superchargers on the PS3 for Christmas, and then to buy secondhand or whatever the Donkey Kong and Bowser figures just to find out that they're not going to work in their game, which also effectively seals off a portion of the content of the game itself, which, at least from my perspective, where I stood on that would have been a massive hit, because I'm known for trying to complete everything the game has to offer, and finding out that 10% of the roster is unplayable and their content is unavailable to me, that would have been a heavy blow.
Yeah, and to essentially, for 100% completion, to be restricted to the Wii U version, because the Wii was just the racing game itself.
Right, which in its own right was an amazing game, but it wasn't the same.
Yeah, so really you're restricted to one version of the game that you can officially 100% as a completionist, yeah. And I mean, at the very least, like, I'm going to reference Soul Calibur 2 again, they didn't make exclusive characters to the Xbox or PlayStation versions at that time, because that would have been a doozy.
Right, and console exclusives like that, they always seem to be a bit of a doozy, because when you're first buying your console before these games launch, you're not thinking about, oh, what am I going to be missing out on character-wise? Like, when choosing to get a PS3 instead of a Wii U, it very likely was not the case where somebody was thinking, oh, but what if Skylanders gets Nintendo exclusive guest stars? They're thinking about what games are exclusive to the consoles, not what characters might be exclusive for cross-console games.
Yeah, absolutely. Because already you have a franchise where it's like you can buy any Skylander before this, and you can switch between any of the console versions. Like if, you own a Wii U and your buddy has a PlayStation, you can just hop your Skylander over to his place and it's no big issue. But now, yeah, you run into a case where it's this character can only be experienced one way.
Right. Now, let's talk about the characters themselves, because we have only really touched on the fact that they were Nintendo exclusive.
Yeah, it's funny how we actually just skirted around that hole for I don't know how many minutes that was, but yeah.
So, with Superchargers came Turbocharged Donkey Kong and Hammerslam Bowser, which are two very interesting iterations of these characters, for one, but they very much, playstyle-wise, feel like Donkey Kong and Bowser would if they ended up in Skylands.
Yeah, and this is where I go back to my point about how well guest characters were translated from their franchises to Skylanders. And it's a different case when you have Spyro entering a franchise that it was kind of originally built for him, to now you have Donkey Kong and Bowser who have appeared pretty much only a certain way in their own franchise, and now you bring them into something as different as Skylanders, because there hasn't, at least to my knowledge, a Nintendo game that was similar to Skylanders that these characters have previously been in. So I believe that with how they were interpreted, really stayed true to who they were, as well as like Skylanderfied them, almost like an upgrade. With now Bowser has a hammer and Donkey Kong has a whole barrel. He just has a barrel.
One of the things that I find most interesting about these guest characters, especially in regards to Superchargers itself, is that these are the only characters in Superchargers whose elements don't match the elements of their vehicle.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very interesting choice, to say the least.
It really is, especially when you consider the fact that the developers had originally intended to introduce brand new elements for these two guest characters. They were going to be introducing the banana and shell elements, and I do believe that their vehicles would have ended up the corresponding element as well.
Mm-hmm. And that would have definitely fit the whole dynamic a bit better, but yeah, it's interesting. I think personally, I would have loved to see the elements that they had originally planned for. Yeah, no, it just would have been interesting, because now, like, if we dive into that, like, they could have potentially had elemental gates or elemental zones, at least in the Wii U version, potentially the Wii version as well, that were like, banana Skylanders are stronger here, or, have a Koopa Shell Skylander, you can enter this gate. That would have been interesting to see if they would have gone that far with it.
Right, it really would have. The possibilities really are just as limitless as they are with any other Skylander, only just adding a new element.
And I don't believe like they would have, unless something else changed, they wouldn't have like kept those for the next game in the franchise. I can't see it, just I feel like that'd be a one game exclusive.
Like, say, a elemental gate for banana element would not have appeared in Imaginators. No. They would have maintained their elements if you used them in that game. So, say in Imaginators you used Donkey Kong, he would maintain the banana element, and he would probably be categorized that way in the collections menu. But they wouldn't have anything locking you out of the game if you didn't have Donkey Kong. And I can especially say this because Imaginators had a lot less requirements from previous games. You didn't need a Trap Master, you didn't need a Giant, you didn't need even a Supercharger. So carrying forward that gimmick would have been out of place by comparison to them having dropped all the rest.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it would just also be interesting too, because then, say in Imaginators, they probably wouldn't even have zones where the banana element or Koopa Shell element is stronger. So, depending how you play the games, if you were to switch your Skylander, depending on that, essentially Bowser and DK wouldn't be in that roster of characters you'd rotate through, because there just would never be a zone strong for them, unless they retroactively then change them to a pre-existing element.
Correct. Or if the game took into account that you had already scanned them in, and then random areas like the arena could switch to those if they had been previously scanned into the game. But they would have to be active in your collection in order for it to make sense.
I'd see that. That'd be a good workaround.
Now, back on the subject of the characters and their playstyles, I found it interesting that Bowser, not only did he have the ability to summon minions, which is something that we see in a number of Skylanders, as we've discussed previously on the podcast. It's something that's been done fairly frequently, and some people love it, some people think it's been overdone, but it was a thing that Bowser could do that honestly makes sense. Being able to call on Koopas at a whim, and then tactically using his hammer to fire them around. But on top of that, they brought in, I believe it's Magma Bowser, as a transformation. And that was also really, really interesting to see. Like, they tried to incorporate as much of Bowser into this guest Skylander as they could. And in the case of Bowser, I think it went over really, really well. He's a fun character to play as. Definitely a character that I would recommend at least spending a little bit of time with, if not a full playthrough. And I think he was magnificently done.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just, if I was recommending to someone Hammerslam Bowser, I would just say, like, you at least have to try and get through every single one of his upgrades or play with a fully upgraded one, because almost each of his moves is a reference to him in his franchise history. You know, like as you said, Molten Bowser, and he, upgrades with red shell Koopas. He can summon a warp pipe, paratroopas, and then even with his soul gem, Dry Bones at the end. Like, it's just, if you've always been a Mario fan, I feel like he is a treat.
The same can honestly be said, maybe not to the same extent, but the same can be said for Donkey Kong, for turbocharged Donkey Kong. Every bit of his moveset is a nod to a Donkey Kong game. And he's a very interesting character in that he's both melee and ranged. His ranged attack is to throw a barrel, which the animation is very, very much akin to what you would see in Donkey Kong Country. And then he has a nod to Donkey Konga while he plays his barrel like a bongo. And he even has a point in his moveset where he becomes, quote, Super Donkey Kong, and he's got basically barrel gloves, a barrel on each fist, and he's able to attack with those. I mean, he gets an ability where he gets to put down an arrow barrel, one of those cannon barrels from Donkey Kong Country, and it fires him off as one would. And then even his soul gem brings in Diddy Kong. Once again, it's a nod back to a bunch of the previous Donkey Kong titles. I didn't really see any nod to the original Donkey Kong game, but outside of that, I feel like he was very, very well represented.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe the original nod would be, if we're talking like the original Donkey Kong, is just him throwing barrels, right?
Fair, but he also, the animation style of how he throws the barrels is more akin to what you see when he picks up and throws a barrel in Donkey Kong Country.
Right, yeah. So, I suppose it's like how far you want to look at that. Just his history of throwing barrels has always been there, I suppose.
That's very true. And, I could be just simply overlooking that, to be honest, because it may not be that deep. It may just be, as you've stated, the fact that he has a history of throwing barrels.
That being said, I would love to see a game from Nintendo of Donkey Kong putting a half of a barrel on each of his fists and using that to take out enemies.
Right, those barrel gauntlets. That was a really, really cool thing that they put together here specifically for this Donkey Kong. And I would love to see that carried over.
Yeah, I know he had I think a cameo appearance in the Wii. It wasn't a Wii port, but it was a new Super Punch Out, I believe. I think it had a cameo as like a bonus enemy or a nemesis you could fight. I believe he just had regular punching boxing gloves, but if if he had the barrels, I think that would have been fantastic.
That would have been, absolutely would have been. I'm not too familiar with that game, but I do know that I had read that Donkey Kong was intended to be a cameo character there. And yeah, like, if they were to retroactively go back and add the half barrels instead of boxing gloves, that would be cool. But that would be a great place to see it if they were ever to do, like, another remake or a sequel or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. Super Mario Punchers.
Now, there are two other guest characters that do need to be addressed that came after these two. And those are Crash Bandicoot and Dr. Neocortex.
Right. So these guys I'm a little less familiar with. I actually didn't grow up, or I've never actually played a Crash Bandicoot game. So my views of them are, I don't have that history of knowing the games as well. But I know the history of Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, as they were both Sony exclusive platformers, and they had crossover games for the Game Boy Advance, I believe. So it was almost like seeing Crash Bandicoot announced as a playable character for Skylanders. It almost felt like a full circle moment, or yes, we've been waiting for this to happen, and now they're giving it to us.
See, from my perspective, my point of view, as somebody who had played all the Spyro games as they were released, and a majority of the Crash Bandicoot games, the way these two franchises were handled was they basically went hand in hand. They could be seen as like rival platformers, but then by the time that Crash Purple and Spyro Orange came out on the Game Boy Advance, their crossover games, it was pretty much just common knowledge that these two went hand in hand. You get one, you get the other. So to have Crash Bandicoot announced as a playable character in Skylanders 6 years in, it was that moment of, well, it's about time. This needed to happen at some point eventually.
Isn't that the title of the newest Crash?
And I was honestly surprised that it took them as long as it did to bring Crash over.
That's fair. That's very fair. Especially for what ended up being the last main Skylanders game in the franchise.
And, well, Superchargers guests were technically a protagonist and an antagonist character. Yes, Crash and Cortex were both those as well. I was surprised that both of the guest characters were from the same franchise this time around. Because, well, Donkey Kong does appear in some Mario-styled games, such as Mario Kart. I don't think anybody really sees Donkey Kong as a Mario character. He kind of has his own franchise all into itself. So seeing Crash, and specifically Crash's antagonist, show up, that was kind of a moment of confusion for me. Because I, even to this day, often wonder whom else might they have brought over that wasn't from the Crash Bandicoot franchise.
Yeah, and it was one of those things, like, again, I didn't have much attachment to the Crash Bandicoot franchise, but I do appreciate Crash Bandicoot as a character, and personally, Dr. Neocortex isn't the most, I'm not speaking for everyone, but to me, he's not the most appealing character that I want to play as. Again, it opens up the thought of what other character from another franchise could we have brought over? Did it have to be something that was specific to, had close ties to Spyro, or could it have been a little more out there? Like, could we have someone wild like Sonic the Hedgehog come over into Skylanders? Or heck, even another Nintendo franchise, Link, for example.
Correct. It makes me wonder, could we have had a character from Legend of Zelda, maybe not necessarily Link himself, but maybe a Zora or a Gerudo, or, perhaps we could have had Kirby come over, or somebody from another major Nintendo franchise, maybe not somebody human, but somebody from another franchise, as opposed to having half of the guest characters total come from the same place.
Yeah, and like at this time you had Lego Dimensions out, and their whole cast of characters is guest characters from multitude of franchises. So, it would have been a good opportunity for Skylanders to maybe compete a little bit in that space. Not, like to have every Skylander be a guest character or anything like that, but just to even like start branching out into other franchises, to maybe even ones people didn't really think were a possibility.
Right, and the possibilities, once again, as with the rest of Skylanders, are endless.
Yeah, you have basically a whole universe of portals and characters getting drawn in from different worlds. It's a perfect story base for anything to happen. And personally, if I am to fan cast a little bit for the next, who would have been a good guest character, Sonic the Hedgehog has been one of my favorite franchises since I was very little. So seeing him or another character from his franchise turn up, like even if Dr. Eggman were to replace Dr. Neocortex, I would have been just totally mind blown.
Yeah, that would have been really cool. And yeah, it would have been more likely to be an antagonist because we did get Crash himself. So to keep the balance, it would make more sense to have an antagonist. So if we went Legend of Zelda, it would probably be like Ganon's more monstrous form, or pretty much anybody from Kirby, or Dr. Eggman, or any of his robots. The possibilities. There are so many of them.
Do you have a personal favorite character that you would have loved to see as a Skylander?
I can't think of any one specifically. There are a lot of games out there, a lot of Nintendo exclusive games even, although ideally for Skylanders, it not be an exclusive, similar to how Crash and Cortex got it right, they were available on every console. But I can't really say that I have one favorite character that I would have liked to have seen guest star. They could have pulled any number of characters from any number of places, and I'd have been absolutely thrilled.
Yeah, I guess it was just, any character from anything would have been just another indicator of like Skylanders is huge,
Right.
Like already at that point, Skylanders is a massive franchise, but to even start branching out more like that, I feel like it just really shows more of the impact this franchise has on the public mindset at the time.
Now, in my case, the only games I can think of that had a massive impact on my life in my childhood were Pokemon. And I think that would be the one area where Skylanders would have gone wrong trying to bring in a guest from. Because even back in 2015, the roster was so immense that choosing one Pokemon to come over and guest star as a Skylander, you cannot make a right decision there. No matter what you do, your decision is wrong.
Yeah, 100%. Like even if you chose, well, like say for example they chose Pikachu, well, it's like why didn't you pick Ash, or why wasn't just Pokemon Trainer like in Smash Brothers, or yeah, you're right. It's just there's an argument for almost every single Pokemon and character in that franchise to be made. That's you're probably just causing more problems than you really wanted to.
Right, and therefore that would be the one game that I would have preferred not to be seen as a possibility for a guest star for Skylanders. There are very, very few series where I would say, don't bring over my favorite character, and that's one of them.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Now, looking at the characters of Crash and Cortex themselves, just as we were able to say with Donkey Kong and with Bowser, Crash Bandicoot in Skylanders Imaginators, everything about him is a nod back to Crash Bandicoot from Crash Bandicoot platformers. Everything from Wumpa Fruits to Tikis, and he even has a life system. He even gets the Box of Rockets Soul Gem that allows him to fire Wumpa Fruits at enemies, which feels very reminiscent to the final boss battle between Crash and Cortex at the end of Crash Bandicoot 2, where he's in space, he's got the jetpack, and he's got to fire those Wumpa Fruits at Cortex. Just about everything regarding his moveset is a nod back to the original character. His Attack 1 and Attack 2 are his spin and his slide attacks, which are iconic to him. Those were all he had going through the majority of these two games, or of the first few games. 3 kind of branched out and added, more vehicles and whatnot, but in the first 2 games, that's really all he had, unless it was a special level of some sort. And the life system, that was beautifully incorporated as part of the design. You'll notice that Crash has a lot less HP than most of the other Skylanders, but that's because he can revive. I can honestly say we have seen this in one Skylander before, but it didn't feel like we had seen this in a Skylander before.
Yeah, it almost, having that life system on the scale that Crash did, it almost felt like, outside of being a guest character, he was like a really special character,
Yes.
I also really appreciate with Crash is that, from what I understand, keeping true to the original game still, he says like some words, but mostly he needs to be translated by Aku Aku.
Right. The place where they went the most out of character for Crash was in Skylanders Academy, where he was fluent in the language that everybody else was speaking. And he was very, very vocal.
Yeah, that's an interesting choice, even for a television show.
It definitely was, and I do wonder why they decided to go that route. Maybe it was because the show was geared at kids who don't necessarily, or they didn't necessarily feel wanted to be bothered with subtitles, or because maybe licensing, so they couldn't have Aku Aku come in and translate for him, or it could be any number of reasons. I'm just curious as to what caused that decision to be made.
Well, maybe we'll find out one day.
Perhaps. But that also brings us to the other guest character from Imaginators, Dr. Neocortex. And Dr. Neocortex is one where I don't feel like they brought the Cortex we knew previously to life here.
So you might have to help a person out who hasn't really played Crash Bandicoot games before, but what in particular is... Okay, well, how was Cortex in his original games, and then how was it so different from his Skylanders interpretation?
Well, for starters, in most of the original games, you never got to play as Cortex. So you didn't really get to experience a whole lot of what Cortex was like in person. He is primarily a character through hologram. So he doesn't have much of a presence while at the same time having a massive presence. I do believe he was eventually made playable in the game Twinsanity, but I'm not too familiar with that one as I never played it. I only ever got as far in the franchise as The Wrath of Cortex, which was the 4th game, after a couple spin-offs, the 4th game released, and it was a PS2 and GameCube and I think maybe Xbox game, but I didn't have the opportunity to play anything beyond that. So I'm not familiar with how he would have moved in Twinsanity, but I do know that Cortex was very much a scientist type of character, and they made him a sorcerer in Imaginators. There are small nods, like he does utilize the Uka Uka mask, and seeing as how I had never seen Uka Uka actually utilized before, it could be hypothesized that this is an appropriate representation or adequate representation of having Uka Uka there as support. But the hoverboard and the mine throws and transforming his gun into a staff, things like that, it didn't have the same callback factor that the other 3 guest stars have had, because he wasn't a character we got to experience. Even in boss battles against him, you didn't really get much of a feel for what his combat style was like, and even if you did, it doesn't feel like what we got here. And so I just feel as though like they may have tried their best, but we didn't have enough Cortex to begin with in order to have the same quality of callback that we do with the other characters.
Yeah. So this is almost like going back to talking about other potential guest characters. This, because there wasn't necessarily enough to go off of or create nods to, maybe it would have been worth trying a different franchise or a different character.
And Cortex is primarily the reason that I've been wondering over the years, like, who else could we have possibly had? Because I don't feel like they did a bad job in representing Cortex. I just don't feel like there was enough of Cortex to represent. And therefore we might have been better off with a different antagonist from a different franchise. Maybe they could have come up with somebody else who could have had that same nostalgia factor, that same level of callback to a history of gaming.
I would even want to go back just earlier in this discussion, but when we were talking about the banana and Koopa shell elements, if those had transpired, we could have potentially seen additional elements outside of what Crash and Cortex brought as life and tech. We potentially could have seen a Wumpa element.
Correct. It definitely would have been a Wumpa element for Crash. There isn't anything else that would have made sense. Unless they put them both under the same element and called it Tiki element. Because Crash has the Aku Aku and Cortex has the Uka Uka.
See, yeah, that would have been an interesting one. And then this probably wouldn't have happened, but it would have been interesting if we did have something like a Tiki element, if it was like Pokemon with fairy types, retroactively change previous Skylanders such as Double Trouble to the Tiki element.
Fair. Just like we've suggested before that when they added the light and dark element in Trap Team, they could have retroactively gone back and added light and dark giants and swappables as well, especially since I believe a dark giant had been mentioned in-game. So they could have retroactively gone back and made those. Granted, they wouldn't be compatible with the earlier games. They would be Trap Team and onward. But it was something that could have been done. And it would have been really, really easy for them to implement it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Even if, in previous games you wouldn't necessarily get, dark and light gates. But you could get, they could come with a DLC map like, the Tower of Time or Dark Light Crypt, etc.
Correct. The things that they could have done, and a lot of this that could be speculated on based on the introduction of guest characters, it's immense. The possibilities literally are endless. They always have been with this franchise, and they always will be.
Mm-hmm. Even with not seeing the likelihood of a new Skylanders game in the foreseeable future, we still have room to speculate what could still come next, because this franchise has done so much and opened up a whole world of possibilities.
Correct. And speaking on that subject, I think it would be rather fitting if we had a little bit of speculation on who they might look at for a 7th Skylanders game for guest characters, and maybe even what elements they might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be especially interesting now with how many years have passed since the previous Skylanders game. What new franchises may be more popular to bring in.
Correct. Like, I would venture to speculate with the growth that it's seen over the past several years, especially since the release of Imaginators, the chances of a Monster Hunter guest character would probably be on the table. Most likely it would be a Palico, or even with the inclusion of Monster Hunter Rise, a Palamute. I could see those as being possible guest characters. I wouldn't have even remotely guessed that back in 2016 with Imaginators, because it didn't have the popularity out here in the West that it does now. But based on growth over recent years, I could definitely see the speculation there at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see. It was the Palico that are the little cat people? Is
Yes,
that
they're the
correct?
little cats.
Yeah, I would absolutely love that. It would be so adorable.
Right, and it would not be hard because Monster Hunter Generations and Generations Ultimate gave us the ability to play as Palicos. So it would not be hard to devise a Skylanders moveset that 100%, just like Bowser or Donkey Kong, is a nod to the originals.
Yeah, like could you imagine like even a soul gem ability of being able to summon I believe, correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, Rathalos?
I believe that's the correct pronunciation. To be able to summon one, that would be very, very interesting. It could be something along the lines of, technically it summons one, but like as you use the ability, the Palico like dives out of the way, and the Rathalos just flamethrowers the area as it flies by and then vanishes. So it could be something more along the lines of, the Palico trying to dodge, but the Rathalos is out there actually dealing damage to like the Chompies.
That'd be pretty fantastic. Sort of yeah, companion. Not really like a minion, but just I guess a minion on a scale that we hadn't seen before in the franchise.
Right. Well, I mean, it could be seen as similar to Chill's whale,
Oh yeah, no, you're right.
except the Rathalos would be actively trying to attack the Palico, whereas Chill's whale is Chill's whale.
Yeah, that'd be a fun dynamic.
Right. So there's definitely speculation for that. What other franchises might there be? And not restricting this to Nintendo in any way, because one thing we've learned over recent years with Super Smash Bros. Is that platform crossovers are very much indeed possible. That's not to say they're the most likely or going to be the best, but they're at least possible.
Hmm. Yeah, and we've seen I think more of recently a renaissance with platformers. So potentially, depending, like probably not if the game was released now, but there was Ukulele came out as well, and Super Lucky's Tale, and I could be wrong. I don't believe those games did as well, but there was a time when we getting more new platform characters that you could bring in.
Speaking of bringing in Ukulele in a similar vein to how Smash got Banjo and Kazooie, that might make for a very interesting Skyland.
Yeah, like to have essentially two characters working symbiotically.
And we already did see that in Bad Juju, but yes,
Oh, that's
this
right.
would be a different type of two characters working symbiotically.
Yeah, there's a lot of different avenues you could take with their attacks and power-ups as the character levels up through the games.
Right.
You could potentially like have one path that even say where to focus more so on Yuka, and then another path where to focus on Laylee.
Right. Like the possibilities are there, and thinking about it, that might not have been a bad solution at all for what comes next in the way of guest characters. But we've only come up with a couple of protagonists so far. What about antagonists? Although technically Palico's kind of neutral because Monster Hunter doesn't really have a protagonist versus antagonist. It's just, the hunter versus the monsters.
They're cute enough. They could probably fly as the protag.
Probably. For antagonists, what franchises might have a long enough history and a high enough popularity to make it work? As you've mentioned, Dr. Eggman.
Yeah.
I could see definitely being... But at the same time, how often have we gotten to play as Eggman? I feel like he might be in a vein similar to Cortex, in the sense that is there enough of Eggman to actually make a moveset that is completely a nod back to it?
Personally, I think so. There hasn't. Okay, you know what? There actually have been plenty of Sonic the Hedgehog games where you can play as Eggman. It's just a lot of them are more squared away as side games, or he was playable in Sonic Adventure 2.
Okay. Now,
Yeah.
I've only ever played one Sonic game, so I'm not very familiar with it. I have seen a few played, and that's why I'm asking the question of you, because you know the franchise better. All I've ever seen of Eggman is him sitting in some sort of mech. Well, the mech attacks Sonic.
Right.
It does sound like there is enough actual history and we see enough of Eggman to actually flesh out a Skylander based on what we know for fact already, without having to speculate.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like he's had such a prevalence even when not playable, and like enough dynamic machines that he uses to fight Sonic, that there is a lot of areas to draw inspiration from. I don't believe he would be as an on-foot Skylander, because it's very rare that he's ever, in a combat situation on foot, but he would probably be either can harken to Sonic Adventure 2, or he's walking in a two-legged mech, or it could be a hovercraft type thing, as he's usually has in the regular Sonic games, or even in Sonic R, where he was racing in one.
Similarly, I could see Shadow the Hedgehog being used as a technical antagonist for Skylanders, and I know there's enough material out there to flesh that out properly.
Oh, 100%. It would also be very interesting to have Shadow brought into the game and not Sonic at all. That would be an interesting move.
It would be, as was the same with Bowser and Donkey Kong. If they gave us any story behind it, it'd be interesting to see how that ended up and to see that actually unfold. Because Bowser did very well as a protagonist, as a guest in Skylanders. He is an antagonist in the Mario series, but he certainly wasn't in Skylanders as a Skylander. And while we didn't exactly get any background on him, we can speculate on that. And I think it would be just as interesting to see the same done with Shadow.
Yeah, I agree. Shadow has a long history and a lot of love from the Sonic community. So seeing him as a Skylander, I think that would actually really do a lot of good for both franchises.
And one of the things I think it would also do really well is what I've always suspected the guest character's main purpose to be. And that is to bring in fans of that guest franchise to Skylanders. And I feel like adding in a character like Shadow the Hedgehog would very effectively draw in a majority of the Sonic community.
Absolutely. Even if they were to just buy the figure and then maybe get into the game after the fact.
Similarly to how we got into Skylanders here.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people's, Skylanders journeys started with just buying the figures for fun.
Yeah, and I do feel strongly that that's what these guest characters were intended to do, is to bring in those fan bases. Other than Crash, because I feel like the Crash and the Spyro fan bases are one and the same, at least for the most part, because those franchises go hand in hand. So I think with the introduction of Crash, it was more meant to be a, it's about time we bring him in type of thing. But definitely with Bowser and Donkey Kong, it was an attempt to get those who are, massive Mario fans or massive DK fans interested in trying Skylanders. And I feel like in a 7th Skylanders game, any guest characters that they bring in would have to be dedicated to, or rededicated to doing that. They would have to pick characters that are popular enough, and that's why also another reason that I speculated that the Palico could be one of those, because the Monster Hunter fan base out here has grown, but a large majority of the Monster Hunter fan base wouldn't even think to give Skylanders time of day, because it's such a different style of game.
I agree. Even thinking outside the bun of what kind of game, like even Ukulele could be a good one just because it's a similar platformer game, but trying to go into a different format of game or a different audience is hugely beneficial, and I agree that is 100% what they were trying to do with previous characters. But what do you think about guest characters in the Skylanders franchise? What do you think of the ones that we got, and what do you think would be great possible entrances into future games? Let us know in the comments or in our Discord. But for the time being, I see Hugo coming down in a hot air balloon. He's waving at us, so I think he has something he wants to share with us. Let's go see what he has to say.
So as Hugo, in contrast to Flynn, relatively safely lands the hot air balloon, he kind of hopped out and ran over towards us, somewhat panicked, with his handbook in hand. It looks like it's dripping? What is that? Is that paint? We flip through the pages of the book trying to find the source and stop on the Skylander splat.
Well, that makes sense now.
In today's episode of Hugo's Handbook, we are going to be rating the Skylander known as Splat, who is a magic element Skylander introduced in Skylanders Superchargers. Now, Splat has a variety of paint-based attacks all the way down to even creating a paint golem. She was originally conceptualized, I believe, as a dark element using only black, white, and gray paints, but has since become the most colorful Skylander of them all, once attacks are accounted for, and also the only Skylanders figure to have its own special scent. In her original design, when she was originally intended to be a dark character, she had no artistic attacks. It was oil rather than paint. And then throughout the development, she gradually became the colorful artist she is now.
Which I believe was a huge improvement, I think, to the original concept. Not that the original concept was bad by any means. I just think having this very bright, vivid, bouncy character, I think, was added more to the game than having sort of the dark and almost dreary character that we could have got.
Absolutely, I agree. And the primary reason that they made this change is because during playtesting, kids would see her staff and that it looked kind of like a brush because it was the oil thing. And they would ask during this playtesting, like, why couldn't her brush only paint one color? And so that led to the Vicarious team kind of reimagining her as more colorful.
The kids know what they want, and they did good.
They did good.
But yeah, Splat, as far as her attacks go, I'm a big fan of being able to use minions, hence like Double Trouble is one of my favorites, and I really love her Ink Golem attacks. The Ink Golems themselves, I think, even design-wise, they stand out quite a bit.
They do, and I feel like even her vehicle, the Splatter Splasher, was really artistically designed and definitely feels very much inspired, just like she does.
Agreed. She honestly is one of those characters that you just look at her, and then also her pairing with the Splatter Splasher, tongue twister, and it just feels like it makes sense. It just clicks in the brain in the right way.
Absolutely, and the rainbow aesthetic of it all, as you're playing through Superchargers or even Imaginators, and you're just going through flinging paint at enemies, just painting the world rainbow colors as you go. It brings a whole different feel to the game than it does when you're rushing through with a character that's just there to, do hand-to-hand combat. It's a lot more artistic. It's just a very different and very appealing, I would say, aesthetic.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And even if you look at, the character's backstory or the lore in the game, just even having that kind of story where she starts off in a village where everything has to be orderly and done a certain way, and she wants to express herself and do something different, I think is always an important message, to get out there. Just be yourself, be who you want to be, and express who you are. I feel like just adds another layer to this character if you're a person who goes into the backstories of your Skylanders.
Right. And then as for overall character design, she is a very much purple and pink fawn with a golden dual-sided paintbrush, and for flair, she's got these golden goggles that sit on top of her head. And that just, I feel like it just goes so well with the rainbow attacks she fires off. Like, she's bright, she's colorful, and so are her attacks. And it just lends more to the whole express yourself and be you.
Absolutely.
At least that's the vibe that I get from her design.
Yeah, and her voice lines, voiced by Brittany Snow, which I just found that out, are also just add to it. I really especially like when she's in the vehicle and she says, "Don't worry, it'll wash out." It just works. It's something like that clicks. Or I know how to make an impression. The dialogue in Skylanders, it's a lot of puns, and it always just it works for me. It clicks. They do such a good job for characterizations.
Her catchphrase has always been one of my favorites as well. Simply the art of war. It's both simple and beautiful all at once.
It really encapsulates her character in a lot of ways.
It really, really does. And as you said, a lot of her voice lines they're just very much her, and they just add a little bit of polish. Now, all that being said, what would you, Trioxen, rate Splat on a scale of 1 to 7?
Honestly, Splat, I think, is going to have to take top marks. I don't usually like to give out like a perfect score, but I feel like she's just a marvel in her series of Superchargers. So I'm going to give her the 7 out of 7.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Uh-oh.
I don't like to give top marks or bottom marks out either unless a character is really overly exceptional. And in this case, I too feel like Splat deserves the 7 out of 7 for just being that character that stands out, that will always stand out. The design is amazing. Her combat skills are well more than adequate, bordering on amazing. Her personality is on display based on her attacks, her movements, and polished out by her voice lines. There are very few Skylanders out there who feel this polished, this complete, without outside reference. And Splat is one of those.
That was so well said.
And as such, that means for an official Hugo's Handbook rating, I am awarding Splat a 7 out of 7, a perfect score, and the first perfect score that Hugo's Handbook has seen. So having solved the mystery of the paint dripping from Hugo's Handbook, we have cleaned up the mess and collected the excess paint in a can, and we're going to go ahead and bring that over to Flynn. Maybe he can come up with a good use for it.
So as we fly on the dread yacht towards our next destination, and Splat's buckets of paint in tow, everything seems to be going very smoothly, almost a little too smoothly. There's a yell from the deck and a point in the north direction, and we notice there's some dark clouds ahead. It looks like a really terrible storm. We might need to seal those paint cans up real tight. With Flynn navigating the treacherous storm, the thunder all around us, we can catch quick glimpses of cannon fire from below, directed at us. And through some of the gaps in the clouds, we can see that we are, oddly, at Mystic Mill. So for today's segment of Dread Yacht Destinations, we will be covering the Skylanders Trap Team level, Mystic Mill. So Mystic Mill is personally a really fun level on Skylanders Trap Team. It starts with a different segment than you spend the rest of the level in, as in you're taking the Dread Yacht through a storm and navigating through that. And then it segues immediately into a turret section where you're firing upon cannons and evilkin who are firing back at you. And you disembark into the Mystic Mill to take it back from Krankenstein, as you also lead the Mabu Defense Force to help you take on the enemies in the level. So, Ditto, how do you feel about this level?
To me, this level's a bit of a mixed bag. I do enjoy the majority of it, but it's no secret at this point that I absolutely hate the turret sections. Turret segments, they're just pretty much there to slow you down. They, unlike the skill check that is the first segment of this level, where it's just platform up to gain control of the ship, I don't feel that there's really all that much in the way of skill involved with a lot of these turret sections, particularly the ones in Trap Team. Some of them do require a bit more, especially like the ones in Swap Force where you're in the snow. But it doesn't feel like any sort of skill check. It feels like it's just there to slow you down. I feel like the turrets that you're taking out with it could just as easily be handled on land as a Skylander, and actually might make for an even more exciting level that way, because all in all, well, Mystic Mill is a perfectly fine level. It's well designed, it looks nice. There's not a whole lot going on. I feel like most of what was going on at the Mystic Mill to begin with, we dealt with the turret section. And therefore, it almost seems as though it should have been an either-or situation, either the turrets or the on-foot part. Because after the turret section, there wasn't exactly much going on with the mill. Why couldn't we just have the Dread Yacht drop us off right where Krankenstein is to finish the job?
Yeah, I agree with you there, because, yeah, I like, in theory, the turret sections, in the sense of, like, you get sort of a quick flyby of a level, in a way. But you're right that there isn't a lot of skill required, and it just honestly having to basically fight the enemies again and go through the level sort of again, it just feels a bit redundant.
It really does. And as a speedrunner, that is a segment where you cannot exactly gain time. The fastest you can go is the fastest it allows you to go, because you're stuck with how quickly your turret section moves.
Yeah, if it wasn't actually like a part of gameplay, it'd almost be worth discounting in any speedrun, I'd imagine.
Pretty much, yeah. And at least that's my opinion on it. So I do like the overall level itself. I just feel like it could have been more exciting. Those turrets that we took out still being there would have added some excitement. You're being bombed as you're trying to run through and take back the mill. That would have been something. Instead, there is one point where you have an enemy throwing explosives at you, and that's because it is one of those small enemies that just spits out bombs as projectiles. Overall, it's just not very eventful, and the Mabu Defense Force is, well, the Mabu Defense Force.
Yeah, I appreciate the novelty of leading the defense force to, build you platforms and help you take on enemies, but that's generally in theory, because the execution, I do like the execution of being able to send them to build platforms. I wish there's maybe a bit more variation you could do with it, rather than it's a kind of just a force segment to build a platform to a next area.
Right.
But yeah, the combat is, you're basically spending the time taking on the enemies yourself. You're basically saving the defense force.
And on the occasions that you're not saving them, they move so slowly.
Yeah, it's really brutal. If they had something like a mine cart or something just to push along, I don't know.
That could have been cool. So, well, I do like the novelty behind the Mabuhu Defense Force, and the fact that they do actually come into play. They're not just there. I feel like the execution could have been a bit better, a bit more creative, and yeah, it could have been as simple as, give them a minecart we can push around, or have them contribute to the battle in some way or other, or give us more than one platform option. Maybe make it a puzzle, if you build this one type of platform, you can get through the door and go get the key. If you build a different platform, instead of that key, you can go over here and find a soul gem. That would have been a really, really cool thing to see. And I feel like, once again, the novelty is there, and it's not bad. It just could have been a little bit better. And I assume it would have just taken a lot more development time and whatnot in order to try to come up with these ideas and implement them, which is probably the majority of the reason that it's not that way. In hindsight, it could have been done better.
Yeah, you can definitely see the ideas behind it, and to me, it reminded me of some of the earlier Skylanders games where, like with the Mabu Defense Force, if you had the option to build different platforms that you build one and you get access to one area, but you don't access another. It's almost like some of the earlier Spyro's Adventures levels where you had a choice and you would have to go replay it again to be able to get the second option. So ideas like that, if they were given more development time and more opportunity to flesh it out a bit more, I really think this level could have been a really good one just because it's sort of pushing ideas that I think were novel. It's just, yeah, they needed a bit more meat to them.
Right. All in all, I'd say it was a solid level. It was a good bit of fun. It's always nice to see it. It's a nice break from the intensity that is a speedrun usually, except for the turret section. The turret segment is the one part of this level where I feel like they could have made it an either or scenario. Land in the mill and then, maybe talk to the NPC right there to go ahead and start up the turret section to clear out a bunch of it and then get dropped off at Krankenstein's ship or Krankenstein's area, or have the option of ignoring the NPC and just going it on foot with the Mabu Defense Force, the way we do anyway, and just having a slightly more exciting level. Overall, I feel like it was a good level, it was a fun level, and given, the amount of time that they had to develop these games, I would say it was on the better side.
Yeah, absolutely. Like in the end, it helped sort of break up maybe monotony is a strong word. It's not what I really mean, but it helps break up the game a bit with some of the things it introduces. And it's a fun time for however long you spend on it. And yeah, it's not the worst, it's not the best, but it's pretty solid.
It's a break from the collectathon that is hunting down the Doom Raiders, while still being a part of the massive collectathon that is the entire game.
Absolutely. And hey, it introduces Krankenstein, which to this day is still a villain I struggle against, with mostly the Skylanders like to play with, which are the slower ones.
And Krankenstein was one of the bigger threats in things like the Chaos Doom Challenge, too.
True.
We didn't exactly bring it up already, but this level also introduced Shield Shredder, who I believe was optional, and, just a very minor side enemy that was just kind of cool.
Yeah, he's a neat one, and, actually, speaking of difficult villains, this also was another one, especially as I typically like to play as Prison Break, being a slower Skylander and him having that shield bash charge. Yeah, that's a hard one to kind of figure out with a character like Prison Break.
Fair.
So with Mystic Mill explored and taken back from Krankenstein, we are boarding the Dread Yacht yet again to go back to our Skylanders Academy, where we've gotten word that Brock is waiting for us with a new surprise guest that he says is a little familiar to us.
As we approach Brock's space in the Archean arena, Flynn is happily piloting the dread yacht, humming along with the troll radio, which has just cut out. Something wrong with our radio? Is K-Troll down? What's going on here? But we've arrived at the arena anyway, so we disembark to be greeted by our good friend Brock, who steps aside to reveal today's Brock's baddie, the one, the only, Chill Bill. Chill Bill is one of the playable villains in Skylanders Trap Team. He is not first sighted there, but he is first encountered as the trappable Chill Bill in Phoenix Sanctuary, Chapter 4 of the game. Chill Bill is a small blue troll equipped with a freeze gun, and he wears brown pants. That's really all there is to him. And he has the frost tank on his back that carries the ice or the water for the freeze ray. But it's really just a very simple design, simple yet effective. It stands out from the other troll enemies just enough. What more is there to be said about Chill Bill?
Yeah, Chill Bill is a simple concept, a simple evolution of the base troll enemy, but it's like you said, he's very effective. He stands out from the crowd. And if it wasn't for his beautiful, wonderful voice, I would have found him to be one of the most annoying enemies in the game, personally.
Right, because if he hits you with that freeze ray, my gosh, that's several seconds you're just stuck in ice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's always typically paired with a group of enemies who are there to set on you and deal some damage while you're stuck.
Right. Chill Bill is very, very rarely seen on his own. When he is, not so big an issue, but typically in a pack, so that tends to make him a much larger threat than we would normally see any other troll as. Then, to top things off, he is also the host of K-Troll Radio, and this progresses outside of Trap Team and even into Imaginators, where he's not just the host of K-Troll Radio, but he's also one of the announcers in the arena itself.
Mm-hmm. His combination with Broccoli Guy is just... it's such a gem. It's a little gem in that game.
So, while his design overall is very basic, it's a very good design in my opinion, and at the same time, his personality is really what puts Chill Bill over the top, because he is more than just the trappable enemy troll that you can play as in one game. He is more than just a villain that you have one battle with. He's more than just an obnoxious villain that can really, really ruin your day if you don't deal with him quickly. He's also a very lovable character overall because we know him and we love him from troll radios and from the arena later on.
Yeah, it's not often when you have an enemy character become a fully fledged, beloved NPC, and honestly, having Chill Bill become that, it works so well. And Alex Ness has put a lot of love into this character.
Right, and that love really shines through. There are very few villains that this can be said of, that they become this lovable NPC. It's pretty much Chill Bill, Brock, Broccoli Guy, and Chaos, and the rest of the villains just, they don't get that same treatment.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, in the development process, like how, or I guess it doesn't even really necessarily happen in the development process. It's what the fans and the players seem to enjoy or latch on to. So it's always interesting to see how certain characters or certain villains or enemies are picked out just based on, reception and even if there's maybe some thought in the development process behind the scenes beforehand.
So, all that being said, Trioxen, on a scale of 1 to 7, how would you rate Chill Bill?
My rating for Chill Bill, I'm going to have to give him a 5. I love his personality. I don't like giving out perfect scores, as you know. But it's mostly his enemy annoying behavior that brings it down for me, because I have a lot of times I can remember of being stuck by that freeze ray and maybe losing a Skylander or two just because there's difficult enemies around him that he's helping in that sense.
I can definitely agree with that, especially from a speedrunning perspective. If that freeze rate hits you once, that could be the end of your run. And that is pretty annoying. That being said, everything outside of that, I would say that and his design would net him a 5 in my opinion. But the fact that he is one of those characters that went and became a beloved NPC, he is the troll radio host, he is the commentator in the arena, and he is also a part of this show. I would say all of that adds up to net him a score of, I would say, 6 out of 7. Which means that Chill Bill receives an official Brock's Baddies rating of 5.5 out of 7. Satisfied with his score of 5.5, Chill Bill sets down his freeze gun and puts on his headset. It seems he is volunteering to commentate an arena battle right here, right now.
So as Ditto and I get behind our respective portals on either side of the arena, ready to summon our respective Skylanders, Chill Bill starts the countdown. 3, 2, 1. With all my might, I think of one of the darkest, most heinous Skylanders from the undead element that I could bring forth. And from my portal, I summon Shortcut.
Oh god, okay.
So Shortcut is a Trap Master from Trap Team. He is an undead melee fighter. He has a health of 720, his critical hit of 56, armor rating of 31, speed of 45, and luck of 28. His attack 1 is his Traptanium Scissors, which deal a damage of 26. While his attack 2, he summons forth Phantom Puppets, which do an attack damage of 10. Later on, he upgrades. He gets the Nether Needle for 33 damage. And then his top path option is the Scary Seamster, which allows his attack 3 to tangle enemies in thread. His scissors gain increased damage against those tangled foes, and they also will explode once they untangle. Then his bottom path is Puppet Master, where he will be able to summon more phantom puppets that deal increased damage, and they heal you as they deal that damage. And as a little added bonus, they explode once they disappear.
Shortcut is actually a really terrifying opponent, especially with what I learned during speedrun prep, where Shortcut actually has the fastest attack speed of all of the Trap Masters. And I learned this based on the fact that he can break Traptanium faster than any of the others because the Traptanium relies on number of hits, not damage dealt. So that's actually kind of terrifying. So to combat this mighty foe, I channel my energy into my portal, focusing on darkness beyond pitch, and I summon forth the mighty Blackout to champion for me this battle.
Well, this is going to be an interesting one.
Blackout is a dark elemental mixed style Skylander with a maximum health at level 20 of 780, critical hit of 56, armor 31, speed 38, and luck 26. His attack 1 is called Wing Whip, and it has him lashing out with his wings, using them as whips for 57 points of damage per shot, and it can combo. His attack 2 is Shadow Orbs, which fires Shadow Orbs forward, dealing 24 points of damage per hit. And his attack 3 is Black Hole, which allows him to summon a black hole that will deal 30 points of damage per hit to its opponent, but also can be used by holding the attack to teleport. For path options, his top path is called Wing Warrior, and it allows for attack 1 to gain further combos, adds a charge to attack 1 to teleport through enemies and pierce with his horn, and increases the damage of wing attacks. His bottom path is known as Prince of Darkness, which allows for Attack 2 to explode into dark energy clouds, which hurt enemies and reduce the damage that Blackout takes while standing within them, and adds a charge to Attack 2, which allows the dark energy clouds to lift enemies and deal damage to a specified area.
Well, first, can I say that this is going to be an interesting one?
Oh, absolutely, especially since our stats are so similar. I have more health, our critical hit and armor are identical, but you have higher speed and slightly higher luck.
Which honestly surprises me initially, mostly because I feel a shortcut is he doesn't look like a fast character, but yeah, like you said, once you get into even just attacking with him, just how fast he is, it's catches you off guard.
Right.
So I think how I'd approach this with dealing with Blackout is I don't know if the minions are really going to be as great of a help in this case. So mostly I think I just want to be able to have shortcut shoot out his nether needle and then come in close and just rapid fire with the his cutting frenzy. Because as the more I can just close in and deal damage to Blackout, and just with the high speed of it, I think that will be what will edge me over in this combat.
And I was afraid you were going to say that, because that's exactly how I would have run shortcut for this one too. Because, well, each of my attacks does more damage than yours. That cutting frenzy, I believe shortcut hits Blackout 5 times to Blackout's 3-wing combo. So in all, I believe the math adds up to shortcut doing more damage than Blackout if we stand there and just attack one combo each other. So my response to this is going to be pretty much cheese, more cheese, and nothing but the cheese. I'm going to take advantage of some of the things that make Blackout more of a mixed character than a melee character, even though his wing attack is very much melee. What I would do, how I would handle this, is I would take the top path, because I want to capitalize on the amount of damage I can put out with that attack 1. I want to maximize that so that maybe I can start outpacing shortcut with the damage as it is. And I would begin the battle by approaching using a black hole to teleport. And then, because my attack 1 allows for me to hold and charge, what I would do is I would try to combo, and once your combo starts, I would get off that charge attack with attack 1 to teleport basically through you, dealing damage, and then do that again from behind. Combo, teleport, each time you turn to meet me with your own combo. I feel like that's going to be my best shot here at claiming a victory.
Sort of a strike and evade. I think that's a really good strategy for Blackout. How I would try and counter that is to get off a little bit of damage by summoning the puppets and having them try and follow you and deal damage to you that way. They wouldn't have that nice explosion feature, because I believe in this combat I would really want to keep the Scary Seamster top path. But if I can even get some puppets off and then shoot Blackout with the nether needle, just to allow some time to increase that damage with my scissors, I have a hard time trying to figure out who would be the most victorious in this situation.
Well, my response to your puppets would be, initially I wouldn't worry about them. If they look like they're going to become a threat, if it looks like they're going to start piling up some damage, even if it is minimal, I would drop a black hole, because that would suck them in, and then from the other side, I don't have to worry about getting hit by them. That nether needle is scary, though, because that would increase your damage, and I think at that point it would come down to how well I can time my evasion.
Yeah, this seems to kind of come down to a precision game of you with Blackout and timing, as well as on my end with being able to aim the nether needle and ensuring I can close in and get you with the scissors right after that.
Correct. Despite us usually having, for the most part, very definitive answers here in the Archean arena, there have been a number of times where we have stated, and I will state firmly again, that these results are not final. Your results may vary depending on Portal Master's skill level. That is something that we try to factor into the best of our ability, but we can't speak for every Portal Master out there. Portal Master's skill level does play an immense part in this, and honestly, from the numerical standpoint, from where I'm looking at this statistically based on our strategies, and based on the fact that after numerous plays, you would also have down better the timing of my evasion tactics, and thus be able to better react to them, I would say that, honestly, this seems pretty close. I would say that this might actually be a draw.
I think I'm going to have to agree with you there. Every battle between these two, like if it was just you and me as the Portal Masters, I feel like it'd be a constant shift in like strategy and determining what you're going to do next. The closest to chess that I think we would get. So yeah, I am going to have to agree with you. This would be a draw.
Very aptly put with the comparison to chess.
So as the dust settles in the arena and we're able to see the field of play once more, Shortcut and Blackout, both scarred, both damaged, but still standing. Chill Bill takes a moment and then announces in his iconic voice that, in a rare occurrence, this Archean Arena has ended in a draw. So with the Archean Arena now all cleaned up and the sun setting over Skylanders Academy, it's time now to bring this episode to a close. Our good friend Chill Bill will now take us away.
That concludes this episode of Skylanders Portalcasters. You'll find the website and links to the hosts' individual channels in the description. Follow the Skylanders Portalcasters Twitter for regular updates about this podcast. And join Discord server for Skylanders discussion. Until next time, this is Chill Bill with K-Troll signing off.
I really hope he doesn't hold that 5 over my head.
I mean, 5 is above average. It's a good score.
It's a good score, yeah. I just hope he doesn't get me with his freeze ray.
I'm sure he won't. But if he does, then I guess I'll be in the market for a new co-host again, won't I?